is probably the biggest turnout we've had here. So thank you all for coming. This is pretty exciting. And for those who are not chapter members, welcome. And my coworker Ahmed is walking in. He's going to be taking notes for everybody. But we hope to have a really exciting day today. I'm here with some great panelists who are friends of mine after doing this for a year now, and we are really pleased to do this again for you. So we hope this is educational and fun. And we really want to thank Format Cyber. Where is Keith? There he is. So Keith is a wonderful sponsor for the chapter. He sponsored our hike. We went on a hike in March this year. And oh wait, I gotta Brian, hold on, I gotta make you the muter. Hold on a second. Sorry. Hold on. I forgot to do this. Sorry.
You've been hijacked. Come on.
You've been hacked.
Where's the negotiation?
I don't negotiate.
All right, Brian, you are the co-host now, so you can mute all these people. Okay. Thank you, Brian. Brian is a board member. He's on our communications chair, and he is wonderful at Discord. If you're interested in helping him out, he's always taking volunteers. And he's going to be a huge help for the ISC2 conference that we are having next week. How many people here are attending the conference? That's a lot of hands. All right. So we have a lot of speakers here. Tom is speaking. Matt is speaking. Who else do we got? Ed is speaking. Erdal. Adnan.
You.
So, me. Michelle. Annetta. Yeah. So we have a lot of people here who are speaking. It's at Kane University. We only have about 30 to 40 spots left, and then we'll be sold out. So, yeah, we'll have 350 people there, and it's a fun chapter. 750 members right now, and we have a lot of activities going on. We already had about like 10 already this year. It's insane. And so I hope you find this educational, and feel free to ask questions in between this if you have any, and I'll be the moderator for this. So with me today, I have Michelle Schapp. Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good evening, everybody, or good morning, depending upon where you are geographically. Michelle Schapp. I'm with Kaiser, Shahney, and John Tomasi. Please don't try to pronounce it. CSG law will suffice. I'd like to say that I am the queen of paranoia, and I don't like to say or think, I told you so. So much better that my clients attend programs like this, get educated, have appropriate policies and procedures in place, appropriate technology, and have folks like you guys available to detect things quickly, contain, eradicate, and move on.
Thank you. Next, we have Morgan Jones.
Hi, everyone. Happy to be back again this year. My name is Morgan Jones. I'm a partner at the law firm of Brown Rudnick. Slightly easier to pronounce, but no catchy acronyms, unfortunately. We also partake and help our clients to stay out of the hangman's noose when it comes to cyber incidents, and encourage them strongly to work with anyone who's part of ISC or CISSP certified. And we are excited to be part of this presentation again.
Fantastic. And next we have a new member to the team, Matt Barrett. Barnett, sorry.
It's all right.
Barrett, new member, sorry.
Consider yourself
No, I
You
did that on purpose, didn't you?
He is paying attention.
I'm Matt Barnett. I'm the CEO at 7X. Please don't try to spell it. We couldn't afford the full domain when we first started, so we dropped an E. You understand. CISSP, ISC squared member since 2018, 19, somewhere in there.
Okay.
I currently lead DFIR and incident response, including negotiations for our firm. We also do penetration testing and advisory services at the strategic level, so. Yeah, that's me.
Terrific. And next, we have Amy Musharraf from DC.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, first of all, I'm very grateful that here at Lowenstein Sandler, Ken is defending our network. So, but I am the chair of Lowenstein's Data Privacy and Cybersecurity Group. I, investigate incidents very large and small. And all I can say is really there's no way to avoid the hangman's noose in an incident. What you really have to do is ride through the waves and permutations of yuck and realize that you're going to have chaos that really isn't controlled, but it can be effectively managed and the damage can be mitigated. And I usually, when I deal with my large events, deal with multi-million person events, as well as hundreds of companies that can usually sue the victim, unfortunately, of the event.
Fantastic. All right, so for those that have not been to a tabletop exercise before, the purpose of it is kind of like a fire drill, where you practice what you need to do to make sure that you have a resilient and strong posture, a cybersecurity posture, by examining the coordination, collaboration, information sharing, and responsible capabilities in reaction to a cybersecurity incident. So the objectives are really to make sure that you discuss the elements of an organization's information security policy. And if you don't know what an information security policy is, we're not going to go into that today, but feel free to talk to one of us about it and we can help you about it, help you understand what it is, understand what an incident response policy is, and really examine it to make sure that it is complete along with the playbooks that you have. Discuss third-party breaches. You're going to hear a lot about that, and ransomware and how to mitigate it. Discuss organizations' third-party vendor contracts, levels of cybersecurity training, and incident reporting requirements. Basically, that's the gist. We don't have to go on to everything. So one of the big things about the rules of engagement is you are not to fight the scenario. Okay, so this is a big one. So I'm going to come up with something and you're like, that's not going on right now. That's not happening right now. Okay, just pretend it is. Okay, so you're going to see some kind of attack that's not out in the wild right now, but could theoretically. Okay, so we're going to let it go. All right, so again, feel free to ask questions, but be brief. All right, so I just wanted to get everybody to a certain level about the state of cybersecurity. As far as third parties risks are concerned, breaches have gone up by 30% from last year. Does anybody know what the two biggest third-party breaches were of last year? No. I mean, actual companies.
Snowflake?
Snowflake, that's one. Okay, it's a appliance that a lot of people have in their what? No, it's an appliance that they have to store files and share it over the internet that you have in the Move it. Was last year. All right. Credential theft, another big one. A lot of them deal with web application infrastructure, CI/CD, and development. Where are these credentials most likely to be found? Anybody want to take a guess?
GitHub.
GitHub. That's correct. All right, that's a public repository for storing code. Okay, a lot of sloppy programmers, right? Leaving their code all over, putting certificates there, private certificates, all different things. And the last thing is the human element. Breaches are caused primarily through credential abuse and social actions. How are they breached?
Combase.
Fishing, who said fishing?
Clicking a link.
Clicking a link, that's right, okay.
Every link.
Bribing, it's new now.
What?
Bribing the
The
internals.
Coinbase one.
Coinbase one,
Yeah,
exactly.
that was the
That's
biggest
right,
one.
that's-
They bribe,
that's-
that's
the
and
new
it's
one.
just 2 weeks old.
Right. All right, SaaS solutions that can cripple the industry. This is all with the Verizon data investigations report. These are all this is all what's coming from. Vendors either in your software chain hosting your data or connecting to your environment. What industry was most impacted last year?
The travel industry, like the planes.
Healthcare?
Healthcare. Change. Okay, I know New Jersey wasn't that impacted by it, but a lot of people in the United States were greatly impacted.
As far as we know, by the way.
As far as we know. All right, so change healthcare, yes. Okay, and ransomware has gone up 37% since last year, and is in 44% of breaches reviewed. 64% of victims did not pay the ransom, as opposed to 50% 2 years ago. Now, here's a question. Are SMBs, small, medium businesses, or larger organizations a bigger target? What do we got? SMBs, that's correct, SMBs. All right. Very good, you all passed. All right. So here we're gonna start the scenario. I came up with very creative names. And I want to give some credit to my friend Ed. Ed Brockner. He helped me develop this. We all developed this together, but he was one of the people that helped develop it. So thank you, Ed, for doing this. So you work for Yacht, a 5-year-old transportation systems company that's in the critical infrastructure category that just went public. It has roughly 500 million in revenue and is located in New Jersey. You are the security officer and report directly to the CIO. All right, June 3rd, the initial event. Users complain about the VoIP phone system known as Voice. It is not working. And by the way, we came up with the scenario before the whole Zoom thing, so thank you.
Aha, so you are behind the.
I gave them the idea. They cannot access customer list, contact list of customers. IT is working with the vendor to discuss the outage. Users rely heavily on chat channels inside the voice system to store important documents. You know, a very good thing to do, very good practice. All right, the same day, 4 hours later, the system is down and vendors are still unsure of the reason. Users are frustrated that they can't communicate with their customers for so long. Ahmed, have we ever had this problem? No. The company did not realize that most of the documents stored in chat channels were not also saved in their OneDrive folder, as per company policy, of course. Users are not sure if PII was stored there. What is IT's next step?
Right. Go to church and pray.
Start your resume?
Sell the stock short.
Which is true, by the way, they do it.
That's the first step you did. Look after yourself, right? And
Insider information.
All right, so is this considered a breach yet?
We don't know.
no,
We don't know, right? Too
no,
early
it's not
to
a breach.
tell.
Not until
Good
legal defines
answer.
a breach.
Good.
No B words here.
No B words, right?
Legal defines that.
Don't say the B word.
All right, so real questions now. What would you do if you were in charge of security? What would your next step be?
Declare an incident and stand up the incident response plan.
What do you guys think? Not bad, right? Not bad answer.
What was the answer?
Stand up your incident response
Yeah.
plan,
Of course,
okay?
issue breach.
And make sure your incident response has been worked in the past.
And I hope it's not stored in those documents.
Hopefully you have a printed
That's
copy
not
somewhere.
All correct answers.
There it is.
I hope it wasn't updated 10 years ago.
Which is also a correct answer.
Yeah, contracts are obsolete.
All right.
Do you have an interesting anecdote? We did have an attacker get an incident response plan and contact everyone on the list. So that was highly not so entertaining.
Wow, that's a good one.
I guess this happened after they refused to pay the ransom, right?
No, it was right off the bat. You might be seeing that your systems are encrypting.
Password
Too late,
protected incident
already.
response plan.
Yep,
All
so
right.
that's a real thing. All right.
Thank you, Amy. All right, next, we're gonna talk a little bit here, take a break, talk a little bit about cyber insurance. So, Michelle, the floor is yours.
So before we talk about cyber insurance, I just want to go back to that reference to your incident response plan. It's no joke. You should not be keeping it online. And at our firm, the incident response plan is printed out twofold. The team has a hard binder in the office, and everybody gets a hard binder to take home. For those of you who've heard me speak before, you've seen my handy dandy incident response calling card. Everybody at my firm has this card because all those customers or all those employees of Yacht who couldn't use Zoom, this is how they would tell Ken, hey, what the heck is going on? Because they can't call him otherwise. And so this would have Ken's cell phone number or a second email address and not Yacht's email or Yacht's phone number, because otherwise, how are you communicating with each other? And if this isn't part of your incident response plan and your reporting chain, you may not be getting the information you need when you need it. For a small fee, this template is available. Even for a glass of wine, it's available after. So, cyber insurance. First of all, for you guys, you're thinking, why does it even matter? Well, it matters because when we think about cyber insurance, assuming A, that it would cover, you want to notify the carrier as soon as possible because you don't want them to say, hey, you didn't tell me you had an incident. Doesn't have to be a breach. You've had an incident that you want coverage for. For you guys, and most of you are not attorneys like Morgan and me, you guys are in the trenches. You want to make sure you've got a good forensics team that you're working with. Before the cyber insurance is placed, that's the time to ask your carrier, hey, I would like to have company ABC as my forensic resource to be put
SCDNX.com.
to be put on, where I am going to be vendor agnostic for the moment. But that's what you want to do before insurance is placed or before insurance is renewed. Same thing with legal counsel, same thing with your crisis communication firm. Because otherwise, you're going to be stuck with whomever your cyber insurance carrier says you will be using, assuming that you want to avail yourself of the cyber insurance coverage. And I assure you that your CFO will want you to avail yourself.
Does the insurance company have priority over their forensic team over yours?
Not when the coverage is first being placed. They want your business.
No, once there's an incident, which happened
You
now,
have to do it when you're getting the policy written.
and you notify the insurance, their team takes over.
Not if you've gotten your preferred provider approved in advance.
Oh, I see.
When you
Right,
apply
so
for
we're
the
talking
insurance,
That's in
about,
the
Always
policy.
negotiate every contract up front.
That's in the policy.
correct, so let's suppose that you're not dealing with an incident and you want to get cyber insurance. And you want to use Matt as your resource. And Morgan
Yeah,
is
no
your attorney. Morgan would negotiate with me, let's suppose I'm now a cyber insurance vendor. And Morgan would say, Michelle, it's really nice that you have companies 1, 2, and 3 on your panel, but we want to use door number 4. The carrier at that point, if they're good people, they'll vet Matt's tires, they'll kick him around a little bit, find out, yeah, he actually knows what he's talking about, and say, yes, for your policy, we will approve Matt as a resource. Similarly, for cyber counsel, let's suppose you want to use Morgan. If he's not already on the panel, if you do that before the insurance is placed, again, they'll kick Morgan's tires, they'll say, what have you done, fill me in here, and the odds are good you get approved. That said, I can also tell you that when you're in the moment of an incident, you can still sometimes get your carrier to approve of whom you would like to use. You just have to work with them. Some are more flexible than others, but you don't get what you don't ask for. And I will also tell you, again, any one of us could be a resource. If the panel council rate or the panel forensic resource rate is $X and who you want to use is $Y, again, your vendor may be willing to work with you. But if you don't ask these questions, you're going to find out you're using XYZ company who may or may not be of a caliber that you and your company want and need. And then in terms of what type of insurance your business should have, I'm gonna sound like a lawyer and say it depends. Depends on whether you're a large company, a small company, how many records are you dealing with? What do your customers require upstream? Have you signed a contract that says thou shalt have cyber insurance that has no less than X millions of dollars of coverage? And for those of you who have businesses that are using Stripe or Plaid or one of those services, if you think their coverage is going to be standing behind you in the event of a breach, first of all, they probably don't even indemnify you. And second of all, trust me, if one of those types of vendors has been breached, a lot of other hands are out for that cyber insurance besides you.
Is it, if they made, is it mandatory? It's not mandatory, right,
To have cyber insurance,
No.
it may be mandated by your upstream customers.
Okay.
Right.
And actually, if you are responding to an RFP for a utility or they won't even entertain you
Oh, really?
if you don't have cyber
So
insurance.
there's no industry
So it's-
regulation, there's no
It's
regulation
not like
out there that
employer's
says-
liability, it's
Correct.
not like, and workers' compensation.
But,
But they won't engage, they might not, you might.
Probably
not.
not.
Okay.
well, and again, if you're counting on your vendor to cover you, and if I'm negotiating a contract right now where we're dealing with a vendor that's going to be touching personally identifiable information, no ifs, ands, or buts. And they want to limit their liability, even for third-party indemnified claims, to 3 times the value of the contract. And by the way, the contract is 25 grand a year. That's useless. So you better have cyber insurance in place. And you want to make sure, given what we're dealing with here, which is third-party vendor risk, that not only is it going to cover you if you've been compromised, but if the underlying breach is not you, but your third-party vendor. I don't want to monopolize this and get into the weeds of cyber insurance. You're going to be getting these slides afterwards, so please take a look at these slides, but keep in mind, time is money. And when you think about, we're dealing with now, we're in hour 4.
Right.
Some cyber policies they will have not only dollar deductibles, but time deductibles. So it may not even kick in for the first 8 hours, 12 hours, or longer of a data breach. And it may not look back. So let's suppose that you decide you want to get cyber insurance. You have a breach on January 1, but you don't know that you've had a breach on January 1. The cyber insurance gets placed in February. In March, it's discovered. The policy may or may not cover you. Think about that timing. So these are the things that you want to think about. And I will tell you that the guy who's placing your auto insurance is not who you want to use to place your cyber insurance. You want to make sure that you got somebody who is knowledgeable about the policy that you're getting. Because otherwise, you'll be like one of my clients, when I asked him day 1 of the data breach, when it was declared, yes, I've had a breach. And I said, do you have cyber insurance? And his response was, I think so. What he had was a slap on to his professional liability policy with a, oh, you'll love this, policy limits were 50 grand with a $25,000 deductible. Useless. So,
That is atrocious.
oh, I would say that it was a claim
Insurance salesman of
against,
the year.
yeah, no.
That's awesome.
Again, what you've got to stand behind you matters. If you want me to say more about cyber insurance, I'm happy to, but otherwise, guys.
Michelle, if I could make a tiny bit of an interjection too, because Michelle's point is so important. Who you have as your broker helping you obtain coverage is not just at the point in which you obtain coverage. Having a good broker, they are literally worth their weight in gold. Because in the event that you want customizations, you want preferred vendors, and your policy is already inked, it is the strength and the purchasing power of your broker to negotiate on your behalf that usually pushes your wants and wishes through. So, as your CFO is saying, oh, I've got this great relationship with X, Y, or Z, make sure that your broker has a very large volume in cyber insurance policies. So, because that broker is your main advocate in the event that you have a breach.
And by the way, this incident response plan that we've talked about, you should have in your incident response plan a tab that lists who are the approved providers, whether or not you've negotiated it, including their contact information, and please confirm that the contact information is valid before you need to reach out to the forensic or the legal or the crisis communication resource. When we updated our incident response plan this year, and I went again to look at who was listed on the panel, one of the points of contact was no longer at the company. If I had put that into my incident response plan, my firm would not have been happy with me. And given our scenario today, as we'll get into it further, one of the things you want to make sure is, does it include ransom coverage?
The other thing I'll say that really quickly that stacks really well with your insurance is an incident response retainer, right? Where you already have a firm pre-selected that's ready to go so that you can minimize the downtime and pick up the phone. The other benefit is that when you onboard a retainer, they usually will do some sort of a download about your environment. So they know what kind of endpoints you have, they know what kind of firewalls you have, they have a rough idea, so they're not walking in cold. Because trying to get somebody up to speed to an enterprise in the middle of an incident with no idea what baseline looks like is really hard, right?
And you're probably focusing on trying to stop the hemorrhaging and not teach people what you have going on.
Mhm.
So that's why having preferred people added in by your insurance carriers is great, and retaining counsel beforehand and other vendors ahead of time is great.
All right, moving on. Let's skip this.
Unless
Yeah,
you want me
no.
to belabor
No.
the insurance.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna go to the discussion questions next. Okay, so at this point, do you enable an incident response plan? We said yes. So what steps would you need to take first? What would be the first part of your incident response plan?
All night.
After you've gotten him as your preferred vendor.
Approved. Yes.
And before you call Matt, who are you engaging him through?
Notify the insurance company?
Also,
No, legal counsel.
but yeah,
Legal
do we know why that is?
They want your money first.
No.
Starts with a P.
Make sure you don't say
Ends in
anything that's gonna get
privilege.
coverage.
It's important. Sorry, so was someone still?
Make sure you don't say anything that's gonna get coverage disclaimed.
Well, that also true, but there's an order of operations sometimes with insurance as well. But were you saying something?
Well, no, you were gonna say they determine whether or not to pull it in as a incident or.
Right.
Also true, but even more important than that, in the event that some claim comes from this, you want to be sure to use outside counsel versus in-house counsel, because the line gets blurred with in-house counsel if they're acting as legal advisors and privilege applies or not. Because everyone likes, as former in-house counsel, everyone likes you to wear lots and lots of hats. And then it gives people the chance to poke holes in what's protected in a Slack or an email or a phone call or what have you. And they can discover it later and use it against you. Outside counsel, we're always privileged.
Can I ask a quick question? I mean,
Well, not always, make sure there's,
Another
only
one?
company employees on the line, but
so,
yes.
Do you have a 24/7 phone line? when
Actually,
incident
my
happens?
firm does. We have an 800 number that you can call.
So, because I never worked.
We don't do
with
it just
external
9 to
counsel.
5, the hackers?
No, we
No,
have
no, no, no.
a lucky
Most of
associate
the
that
time
has the
happens
answer
before
at any time of
Christmas,
the day.
the big events, right? I mean, I was in NotPetya. When NotPetya happened, I flew in the first plane to Ukraine. I was back and working for Microsoft.
Mhm.
And NotPetya was a very easy one to solve because there was nothing left for us to do. But
Let's hope it's not all that
Russia
easy.
came in, they cleared everything, and no ransomware asked. But I'm pretty sure you will all remember the big Aramco event in Saudi, right? Arab American Petrol Company, world's, and there they had I mean, we had always, when I at least legal counsels on board, but that's why I asked that question. Like, seriously, how do we work with counsels externally? That's why I asked that question.
Well, that's why it's important to have people engaged beforehand. And because of that, like as Michelle was saying, if just in case someone leaves, we have an 800 number set up that would go on that lovely little card that she has.
Not to worry.
And a crack team of associates that are awake round the clock globally to answer that
Who
phone.
take Morgan's name in vain?
Perhaps, but they would call me and the other partners in the group as soon as they get that 800 call.
But I want to just add one other thought to that, and I was negotiating with clients, with somebody like Matt, we were dealing with a data breach, and of course, you've got that lovely clock ticking from the threat actor that if you don't pay by a certain time, your data is going to be out there. And it was Saturday afternoon, we were discussing, were we going to pay? If we're going to pay, what are we going to pay? The ransom negotiator went dark at 8 o'clock on Saturday night. My client is saying all sorts of interesting expletives. I'm saying interesting expletives to the resource that had put me in touch with the ransom negotiator and basically said, you gotta be kidding me. I had already lined up another negotiator to step in by Sunday morning at 2 o'clock in the morning because I had resources who I knew I could contact 24/7, 365. This is not a practice for somebody who needs sleep. It's that simple. When you're on the clock, when you're dealing with a data incident, regardless of whether you know it's a breach or not, it's all hands on deck. And it is until the incident is identified, contained, eradicated, resolved. And granted, on the back end, things slow down a little bit, but especially when you're on the clock, you better be reachable.
Amy, you get a lot of sleep, don't you?
Not usually. But that said, having round the clock visibility and having people who have staffing to be able to make that happen is incredibly important. I would just like to echo what Michelle is saying in that most of the providers that I work with, I've worked with for years. So I know and can anticipate, not just the principal, but also many people down the chain. So you also want to work with a legal team because we end up retaining all the vendors. We end up being your quarterback of the ballet. You want to make sure that your legal vendors have heft and have long-term relationships with the vendors that you're working with, so they can also use their purchasing power to make sure that you get the excellent service that you deserve.
Just to back up something we were touching on and we kind of branched off, the reason you want to retain vendors through legal counsel is because the privilege extends to communications with those vendors.
Mm-hmm.
If you do it through directly, that could be discoverable as well. So you don't want your forensics investigator to be engaged by your company.
All of our proposals are tri-party, every one of them.
Yeah. If I might add just a little bit on privilege, because I see the litigation side too, guys. And everybody always tells me, well, don't the regulators always break privilege anyways? They can. But when it matters, when you've got 20 and when you have 20 class action complaints, and this happens now by virtue of the CCPA in California and having statutory damages. It also has happened for those of you who are subject to the FCRA and other statutory damages lawsuits. We now have the size matters, Morgans and Morgans of the world who do data breaches. Yes. Yes. And oftentimes, if there's PII involved, you're getting sued. And oftentimes, they will stretch jurisdiction to get as many class action plaintiffs and as many class action complaints as they possibly can.
And
so it matters.
And I know Morgan's going to get into this a little bit later in the conversation, but in terms of having a mega breach, and one of the breaches that I dealt with this past year involved X many people in one particular state, When you get over a certain number, not only do you have to notify those individuals, you actually have to report to the credit monitoring agencies. And that's where the Morgans and Morgans are shopping for their customers. They are looking at those reports so that they know, oh, here's our potential plaintiff's pool.
Interesting. All right, we gotta move on.
Mm.
All right, let's jump to, at this point, would you notify your employees?
No.
No? All right, you don't know,
What about, how do you let your employees know how you communicate with them? Forget about notifying them of an incident, just about how to communicate with the employees.
I guess it depends on who, right? Departments, like department heads, I'm thinking of like, you got information security, you got all of the relevant parties, you need information security, you need legal, you need audit, probably, you need risk, you need.
I don't want gossip going on.
Right, I would think you're one of those heads of those different areas to kind of get together in a room and just kind of like, in addition to obviously incident response and that.
A
I
good
think you need all those
IRP.
other bodies, right, to kind of privacy, obviously. So.
Yeah, good IRP would probably dictate when you disseminate to the troops. Like if it's a situation where people are gonna go to log in the morning and they can't,
Yeah.
probably should have their boss call them and
Yeah,
let
right.
them know to not say anything, and this is why you can't get in. So it's depends situation.
If you don't tell your employees what to tell customers, they'll make it up.
Yeah,
Say
if-
nothing.
if I can offer a word about this too, if you have commissioned salespeople, you are in a business in which you have commissioned salespeople, assume the moment that there's even an inkling that there could be a network disturbance, your employees are talking. So particularly if you're heavily regulated, if your employees can't log in, or you have commission-based staff or account rep-based staff, those are the types of breaches in which you want a series of holding statements. One for the troops on the ground. This is what everybody knows, even if everyone knows nothing. One holding statement for those who are in supervisory authority if people come to them with questions, and one holding statement for those that are client facing with the designation of who is able to talk beyond the holding statement, because there will always be questions. And you only want your client facing individuals to be able to talk to a certain point and then maintain a level of hierarchy. So only the people who have relevant knowledge are making sure to disseminate those communications. And you may decide, at least in that first week, that you're not saying much beyond those holding statements. And even if you're offering question statements and you're offering escalation, those who are escalating are diffusing the anger and not releasing more information. So you do have to be with employee and kind of all the gamut of different permutations of employees, especially if it's a large one. You have to have a comm strategy that's external as well as internal.
Yeah, remember, we alluded to not pay you earlier. There's an international law firm, an international, law firm. I will leave it nameless for the moment, that were hit by not pay yet. The way that they were communicating with their personnel was a chalkboard in the lobby.
Wow.
You want to have a communication plan and a strategy, and as Amy said, those messages as part of your incident response plan, because remember, we're talking about the voice system of this company. That means that coworkers can't talk to each other. Customers can't reach those commissioned salespeople. There has to be some message. And it doesn't mean the message should be, oh, we've had a breach. It should be, we're having an issue with our communication systems. This is how you can reach us.
right. And that leads to the next question. What is your method for sharing information you have gained with each other? Are you gonna do this through email?
You need a communications plan. You have a communications plan. And
Right.
That's part of the policy.
Correct. So you have to have something, whether it's Signal or some other secure way of communicating that's already set up. You're not gonna start scrambling, creating this thing, downloading apps to do that. That would be the worst thing in the world. And how are you gonna communicate to your clients as well, or customers, securely also, if you need to?
To just reflect on all this, this is the what ifs, what do we do when? That is why exercises like this are so important. People, you can talk to them till you blue in the face, but if they don't deal with this every day, they're going to forget, even if you do annual training. The important thing to do is walk them through it. I firmly believe in muscle memory, and people will remember what it is they did, who they called when you did the mock breach, more than what you told them on the day they were hired. And what, you expected them to read in the giant employee handbook.
Very true. All right, Morgan, put your mic on, please. So that
Sure.
everybody on the outside.
All right, I think that's on now. So we're just going to dive a bit into the legal aspects of dealing with incidents before we start invoking the B word. So we have about 20 comprehensive privacy laws throughout the state privacy laws, that is, and pretty much every state and territory of the U.S. has a breach notification law. We're going to focus on New Jersey for two reasons. One, that is where Yacht is based. And two, that is where we are now. And well, three, it's the best state. So first we're going to talk about the new, brand spanking new data privacy law in New Jersey, effective January of this year. It closely resembles many of the other laws that have been coming into effect, which are all kind of moving in the direction of the GDPR, for those of you that have heard of that law. But, all right, well, I'm losing steam now. The New Jersey data privacy law protects us as most of us as New Jersey citizens, and it applies to residents. You're right, residents. If it applies to persons, which can mean people or companies. So it depends if you're a single member LLC or true larger company. If you're conducting business in New Jersey and produce products or service or produce products or offer services to people in New Jersey, the New Jersey residents, that is. And in the previous calendar year, you either controlled or processed. Now, those are terms of art. Control means you determine the means or purposes of why you're using the personal information. Or processing is more like you're doing something for a company that they can do for themselves, but you're a vendor and it's easier to give it to you. Of not less than 100,000 New Jersey residents, but no payment-only transactions. So the stripes and the plaids are excluded. Or in the previous calendar year, you controlled or processed not less than 25,000 residents' personal data, and you sold, and you drive revenue from the sale of their data. Now, sale is a very tricky term. It can mean a lot of different things state to state. Usually the variation is either for just monetary consideration or for monetary consideration and any other valuable consideration. Yes, sir.
Is this unique individuals or is this just a catch-all bucket? If I have 1,000 transactions or 100,000 transactions with one person, does that count as 100,000 records and bring you into applicability, or is it just explicitly it has to be 100,000 New Jersey residents, separate New Jersey residents?
And separate New Jersey residents. So anyway, sale in this case is going to be for value or for compensation or for monetary value or anything of value. But in this case, the revenue, this is a unique among all the state laws. Usually they set a threshold of the amount of money that you make off of the sale of revenue for this to trigger. New Jersey does not have that. So if you make a penny off of selling data or exchanging it for other data, it counts and it triggers the law to apply to your processing of the data. So if you're a controller, there's a series of obligations that fall squarely on your shoulders. And I've put a few up on the board. It's things you probably already know to do, even if you don't know that that's the law. Make sure you have adequate or appropriate protections in place. Technical, organizational, physical, lock your doors, use encryption, etc. Make sure you have you comply with all the principles of law, and that you have a sufficiently transparent data privacy policy posted on your website. Now, that's less in your domain, more in legals and privacies, but you might be asked to consult and provide some high-level details on what sort of security is in place. So, okay, go to the next slide. Sorry. Yep. There's a few other things to be aware of. There's the opt-in, opt-out considerations and aspects of these laws. Usually in the United States, it's do until someone asks you to stop doing. It's an ask for forgiveness situation, except for minors, people under the age of 18. So for New Jersey, in the 13 to 17-year-old range, you cannot do certain processing unless those individuals opt in first, which your marketing team hates the use of the opt in, but it's for their own good. Makes the data more, what's the word I'm looking for? Dependable and more solid and more reliable, as opposed to you might have to throw it out later if you found it was the proper opt-in was not obtained. So you can't process sensitive information like health records, sexuality, certain other very sensitive information, maybe religion as well, depending on the law. You can't process their data for targeted advertising. Again, I'm sorry, marketing, but that's the way it is. You can't sell their data, which again, remember, it's a very broad definition, and you cannot profile them in furtherance of decisions. So there's a concept called automated decision making, which basically means the computer looks at variables X, Y, and Z and says you're approved for a loan, you're not approved for a loan, or something to the fact you're insurable, you're not insurable. And these are the significant decisions that they're referring to, or a legal decision, something very impactful. So you have to be very careful. You need to have someone monitoring these decisions as they're being made to make sure there's no discriminatory aspects to it. So sorry, I'm just reading as we go. Please note there's also a the opt-out applies for everyone. So whether you're 13, 18, 22, 102, you can opt out of a lot of the processing that I just talked about. And please also note, and I know a lot of people hate this, universal opt-out signals. These become mandatory in a little over a month for New Jersey. So if you haven't configured your systems to respond to these yet, I suggest you add it for tomorrow to start thinking about it and get it in place in the next several weeks, because it's coming for you. So the violations, you might be able to skate by with a 30-day cure period, depending on how generous the Attorney General is feeling when you report it. But they might say, no, this is not fixable, and they might fine you immediately. So there are a series of fines associated with New Jersey law, pardon me. You can start anywhere from 10,000 or for the first offense, and you can go up to 20,000 per offense after that. But
Sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
Is it per head or?
Not per head. No, it's per event.
Per,
Nobody can
that's
afford
cheap
per head.
compared to GDPR.
We'll see.
The GDPR is a percentage of revenue for
4%.
violations. The GDPR is a percentage of revenue. Also, depending on the type of event that you have, there could be more than one event, and more than one violation. So, you could have more than one offense for a period of conduct spanning over a time. So, it's not just $10,000 or $20,000 in isolation. Fees can add up. And also, we're expecting for AGs to get more aggressive because they are enforcing in lieu of a primary enforcer federally, the FTC, given the Trump administration, and just the less enforcement that we'll see in the federal sector, at least over the next 4 years. So usually the states will pick up an advocacy where the federal government leads.
Thank you.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead, Ed.
So if an organization meets all these thresholds, does this automatically apply, or there are certain exemptions for this law?
Can you say that one more time, please?
Are there certain exemptions for organizations where if you meet this threshold, you're automatically subject to this law? exemptions for organizations?
There can be, yes. Certain government organizations are exempt and financial organizations, if GLBA, for instance, applies.
But not-for-profits are not exempt under New Jersey's law.
Yeah. And GLBA is an interesting little animal, as well as all of the federal exemptions, because depending on the exemption, they are only exempt to the extent that the law applies. So GLBA does not apply in the vast majority of cases in which there is digital advertising, because you are usually trying to bring a customer or a consumer to a website. If you are under HIPAA, ancillary activities that are not medical care and treatment reimbursable by insurance, there are lots and lots of loopholes. So if you are highly regulated, make sure that the lawyer that you're working with knows the intricacies of state and federal regulation and how those exemptions work.
Yes, so it can get very messy if you're trying to find that fine line where GLBA or HIPAA stop and the New Jersey or other state laws apply. It can be quite the headache, and that's why these things, when responding to incidents is usually a very costly analysis. But good news for New Jersey, unlike California, there is no private right of action. So that means you can't be sued by the individuals. And there's no class action availability as well, but California there is, and there's still other consumer protection laws you'd have to worry about. So again, there's a lot of analysis that goes into it, and the sooner you can get legal counsel, all the information, what happened, what information was in play, all the other regulations that apply to you, if they don't work with you already, this is another reason why having a relationship with legal counsel already when the breach happens is important, because it's all shorthand and they know these things about you. It helps expedite the situation, and you can respond in the timelines that you're supposed to respond in, notify the regulators, the attorney general, etc., and explain away as well as you possibly can what happened and why it was a fluke, hopefully.
Sorry, me again. You said good news. Is it for the victim or for the IT team, for the organization? I know you said good news.
Private cause of action.
No,
Good news is there is no prior cause of action, which is good news for the entity.
So it's good news. It's good news
Good
for
news.
us.
Good news for the
Good
company.
us.
Thank you.
I can see he's a lawyer, right?
All right.
I have to think about my client.
Yes.
We gotta move this along, or else we're
Sorry.
gonna be here till 10. All right.
I used to do law school till 10 every night. You guys saw for one night. Then we have the New Jersey breach reporting law. So unlike the New Jersey comprehensive law we just talked about, this is very similar to what you see in every state. They tell you what if they consider personal data, which is very different than the actual comprehensive laws. They tell you what is considered a breach. It involves their specific definition of personal data and who you have to notify and when. Now, there, as Michelle alluded to, there could be certain size requirements before you start having to notify even any regulator. You might have to have at least 500 people in the state to notify anyone. It could only, that number could dictate whether you just notify individuals or regulators, etc. It's a very complicated process, and it can change with the law. So every year, people are always going through and reviewing and see what changes were made. But the big thing is there's a very tight deadline, and usually it takes you at least a few weeks to really get your arms around what's going on and figure out what was in play, so that you can make the necessary reporting.
And don't assume that if you go on to ChatGPT and ask it what are the reporting requirements, that the result will be accurate, please.
Don't use ChatGPT for anything.
If I can offer something too. There are some insurance counsel that also use automated databases that aren't necessarily cross-checking to the extent that you want the law. So, you know, it's important to make sure and prime your general counsel who's going to be managing your lawyers. You know, is my attorney looking at an automated source? Are they cross-checking the law? because especially for those of you who are heavily regulated, and there are exemptions, and there are different things that constitute PII. Even though many of us in this industry, myself included, I've wrestled with these laws since they started in 2005 with the introduction of the California Data Breach Statute. It is still always an intricate analysis, and there's always individualized circumstances. So you really want to make sure that your lawyer is not just running this through a response legal analysis and is undertaking an appropriate analysis for you.
Yeah, I would be beside myself if someone did that I knew. Yeah, each state does have one of these laws, and they're all slightly different. So, one thing to mention is employee data is not included in the New Jersey privacy law. So, if it's just an internal like HR breach, HR incident, you will be outside the scope of New Jersey.
Well, no, two different issues, just to be clear. New Jersey's proactive privacy law does not apply to employee data. However, under New Jersey's breach notification law, if the employee's information has been exposed, you do have to notify those employees.
Yeah, you can see on the screen what they consider the personal data. So HR more likely than not has your social security number or equivalent. So chances are your first name or first initial and last name and a social security number were involved in that incident if HR was subject to an incident. So two different ways to look at this.
All right, one question, then we gotta move to the next one. Okay, go ahead.
Your slide's also missing the PII count number. You know, below certain thresholds.
You can't put everything.
1,000 and above, so.
Yeah, we were already going over time. I couldn't touch on each and every element, but yes, certain states do have.
So little businesses, nobody cares, bigger businesses, people care.
Yeah.
Well, you can have small business and still a lot of people.
Sure.
Also, not just laws that you need to be looking at in terms of whether you have a reporting obligation, you have to look at your contracts, whether there's a reporting obligation. Remember yachts, dealing with a lot of customers.
All right, let's keep going with the scenario. Thank you.
So with all that in mind, think about yacht.
Thank you, Morgan. All right, so the scenario gets worse. Ransomware is detected on one of your critical systems that was caused by the third party. What do you do first now?
Hi, Matt.
Oh, shit, man. I can't read that one.
Ransomware.
Ransomware is detected on one of your critical systems.
It's not perfect.
Just on that news.
There we go. Yep. So, what do you guys think we do first? Isolate, right? Good, okay. So this is where your incident response plan should classify incidents, right? With one of the distinctions being how many systems are affected, because we typically respond to an incident based on its size and scope, right? So if you have one user, one laptop, one idiot that did one thing at their home, right, that doesn't traverse the network, doesn't traverse file shares, you handle that very differently than when it affects your primary file shares, traverses into SharePoint, traverses into, General Dynamics and all the other, or Great Plains or any of those types of systems, right? So the first thing you want to get a handle on is it critical systems? In this case, it is. So isolation, obviously, right? Stop the bleeding, contain. And then the next thing you want to do is what?
Matt, could you just take a minute on not all isolation is created equal? And what you don't want people to do?
Yeah. Yes. So when we talk about isolation, are we talking about network isolation? Are we talking about power cord in the wall? What kind of isolation are we talking about?
Obviously, I'm gonna run into the server room with an axe and I'm gonna.
If you're talking about the fiber line, cut away, right? If you're talking about the power line from Pico, or what do they have here? PSE&G, Edison.
Yes, PSE&G.
Don't cut the Edison cable, PSE&G. Cut the fiber line. It's much cheaper to fix. No, right? So ransomware, a lot of times, and this is a little bit less true now than it used to be, but the way that encryption works, a lot of the inner guts, the decryption keys, the callback information, a lot of that gets stored in memory because it's obviously not going to get encrypted as part of the disk level or file level encryption. So properly analyzed, a system that you recover the memory from could potentially give you the decryption keys to the software or to the ransomware. The other thing it can do is give us IOCs. It can give us in-memory diagnostics about the system that could be useful in either tracking back or attributing to the threat actor group or to figuring out additional IOCs for your CrowdStrikes and your SentinelOnes.
All right, great. What would your communications be internally versus externally when you get to this point? Would they be the same? Would they be different?
I would think they'd be different.
Should be different. The issue is that people talk, right? So if you tell internal people one thing and you tell
Actually, at our company, they tell everybody to zip it, and the press release tells the story.
Exactly, yeah.
I remember sitting in a war room where, IBM, I was Microsoft back then, IBM, all this, we had someone like Matt in the room, then the CIO walks the room, hey, it's like, look at the news, everything's under control, we're back to business, which is total lie. Usually it's different internally and outside.
It
but I
depends,
guess it's
like
still-
you want the core people obviously to be
Exactly.
able to speak freely, but the employees should not know anything different.
Otherwise
than-
it will leak out.
Right, exactly.
And to keep in mind also how you're communicating internally. Because if you're sending an email to your employees internally saying, this is what happened, blah, 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 and you're giving them a great level of detail, not only are the employees busy working on their resumes, they're sharing that information. So think about whether whatever communication you want to have with your employees, should it be an employee meeting like this, bring everybody together. Can't do it on your voiceover system because that's out of action. But think about how you're going to communicate to the employees, what you're going to communicate to the employees, but you also have to think about what are you now communicating to regulators? Because remember, Yacht is publicly traded. So you have to think about those obligations as well. And if it's part of critical infrastructure, again, there's different reporting obligations.
Right, I'm
So
not-
what if this wife have a staff working remotely throughout the US? Are they gonna bring them in one place?
That's right.
I didn't.
If they're working
Phone tree.
remotely.
If they're working remotely,
That's
how
right.
do you do it?
So again, Morgan, myself, Amy, we've dealt with data breaches that involve multinational organizations. What they'll often do is they will call meetings locally and communicate with staff, but even those you want to coordinate. Because if New Jersey hears it before California hears it, and then New Jersey's picking up the phone and calling the folks in California and saying, did you hear about this? And California's saying, huh? What are you talking about?
Or if you tell customers before you tell the regulator, that's a no-no in some states too. Sometimes the regulator has to know first or after. There's sequences that you have to follow.
Yeah, and with the communications cascade, this is so important as to why you have a crisis communications plan in addition to your incident response plan, because there are probably resources that your crisis team already has that you can use to do emergency alerts to your employees, to make initial outage alerts to clients that aren't breach alerts, they're outage alerts, and they're established processes. So your IRP, your incident response plan, should not be outside of normal employee crisis communications. The reason why we embed them is because it makes it more likely that your processes are followed and that people understand the flow. So you just end up having a component of your crisis playbook for incident response situations.
So it's also the question of how much information you're gonna release internally is also, you have to give serious consideration to the fact that, if you have a threat actor in there and they've established persistence, Are you isolated? Are you providing them tactical information as far as, it's all right, guys, the backups that are going into the rubric system are still fine. The attackers didn't get those. Log into the alternate site here at this site. So
Yeah, no, that's usually not the level of communications that you give employees. Like usually it is, we are experiencing a disruption, and a very short statement after that. So all I will say, because we are short on time, and I do want to make sure that we move, is just make sure that you have someone who does this all the time and is extremely skilled in crisis communication in addition to the legal analysis, because it ends up being the legal team and the security team that together piggyback and inform your PR and crisis communications teams, and usually who hire your PR crisis person if the incident is large enough. So we always are very mindful of what we think could be compromised. But with employee communications, you can't leave them in the dark, and follow established processes so they actually get done. And I will say my biggest rule in incident response is loose lips sink ships. Unless you give some level of information to your employees, they are going to be guessing. They will not be told not to, everything is confidential, and they're going to say stuff and the rumor mill gets out before you know it.
The water cooler is not your friend.
Sorry, do I understand it correctly that in this scenario, we assume that there is no counterplay against you in media? And you got to know it first before the public?
Correct.
Mhm.
Yeah, because it's
Because
not,
I can
it's
imagine
not
a
like a
different
national
scenario,
voice company that's down or something like that. It's your particular system that's.
But I can imagine a different scenario when, along with the downtime of the voice system, your employees are figuring out from the news that there is like on Twitter,
Yeah.
they are
So-
getting screenshots of your internal
Yeah.
documents. That's a
Yeah,
different
I
story.
can answer that because I had 10 years where that was the vast majority of the ways that you got informed. I cut my teeth on the credit card breaches between 2005 and 2015. And Brian Krebs, the way that he always beat the firm that was actually compromised is that he usually looked on the US Treasury wires to see and to report out on breaches, because the US Treasury has to report very, very early. If you are a compromised bank or a large institution, you are reporting to your regulators very, very early, and those treasury wires became a source of news. Usually with ransomware that we are seeing and third-party attacks, you have the benefit of knowing that you are encrypted before anyone else, because you have some level of visibility into your enterprise. And at least, for example, uptime and capacity, your ILO's going nuts. You know, like your security team will have signs that encryption is happening.
Yeah, and don't forget, your data is worth more to you than it is to anybody else. And so there is a benefit for the attackers to keep you as the primary buyer for your own data, right? The minute it gets out, it drops dramatically.
Mhm.
Only if the value is the data in data, or and not taking you out of the market.
No, not necessarily, right? Sometimes the data is confidential, proprietary, classified, or whatever, but sometimes it's just, you have contractors or upstream vendors that, you want to be doing the best diligence you can for your clients. So it's not just the sensitivity of the data, it's about containing the breach.
Exactly. And we often have many breaches where the data really doesn't matter. It is the perception of the fact that you were breached, especially if you're a business to business company, where those subsidiary victims, your clients, are paying you millions of dollars a year. So they're very, very high value to you.
All right. Okay, and what is your responsibility to the client from a potential breach perspective?
Breach contract. Have your legal counsel check the contract.
And by the way, your incident response plan should reflect that. Because if you have customers or clients that say that they need to be notified within 24 hours or 48 hours or whatever the time frame is, You have that at your fingertips.
Yeah, there should be a page.
Exactly.
Can I be a little bit realistic too, guys? Everybody blows 24, 48, 72-hour deadlines. Everybody blows them. Unless you're a government contractor and it is a 7+ figure contract. Those 24, 48-hour and 72 deadlines, we endeavor to make those to the best of our ability, but usually we are apologizing for the fact that we are not making them. And as much as we want to say, have your contracts categorized in your incident response plan, in your contracts system, our clients, those are always a mess. So what we end up doing is everybody in this room, you've got a top tier of clients who are your whales, who are your advocates. Even if you don't have the contracts categorized, your business teams will always have the whales categorized. Those are, regardless of the content of your contract, get out to the people who keep your lights running first. And that's the practical breach perspective instead of the legal thing that I'm supposed to say. I want you to keep your lights running because more importantly than anything, a ransomware is a cash outlay event where usually you are not booking revenue for a period of time and you are losing goodwill of your clients on a day-to-day basis.
The other thing, and I want to piggyback on what Amy is saying, one of the data breaches that we dealt with, when you looked at what the contract required in terms of the reporting line, it was to a mid-level guy at the customer, and this customer was a whale for our client. And it happened to be a guy who wanted to replace our client with another vendor. We already knew that was out there. And so even though the agreement with the customer said that if you have a data incident, this is who you're going to notify at the customer point, we made the business decision that the letter was going to come from my office to the GC of the whale customer. And that way we avoided the issue of dealing with the line guy, because it's not as if the whale's gonna complain that we notified their general counsel. Nobody's gonna say, well, you didn't follow the letter of the contract because we went to the GC's office. But it also meant that that line guy who wanted to replace our client wasn't getting that notice and using it to say, aha, you see, we should replace them.
The other thing Michelle said right before we kind of went down this road was about the incident response plan. And just to double down on this, if you think your incident response plan is the thing that ChatGPT made for you, or it's if your incident response plan is less than 10 pages, you're doing it wrong, right? It should have classification. It should have call trees. It should have the note keeper's log, right? What was done, what time and date, all of your critical teams. It should have your contact information. It needs to be updated. I would say at least quarterly, right, to make sure those numbers don't change. And but at least incidents. And after incidents, because you always learn. But yeah, if you think that this is just something you pulled off the internet or you cloned from a university that makes them all public, which are great, you really should take a hard look at that.
And if you got your incident response plan and didn't heavily customize it, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. The only value of that incident response plan is that it's actually representing how you're actually going to resolve the event. So, we have on our incident response plans, we have checklists for different types of events because you're going to respond and categorize differently if you're in a ransomware versus an insider threat. And if you don't have heavily customized checklists, you won't have a step-by-step action that if, let's say, one of your managers are new before your annual tabletop or semi-annual tabletop happens, they won't know what to do. So making sure that you have an excellent incident response plan that's backed up by checklists. And I love it when I walk into a place that also has a security incident response playbook. And security works with the business as well-oiled machines. Makes my job much easier. If they don't have a good incident response plan, your breach is going to be much, much more expensive because there won't be good lines of communication. There won't be good lines of decision-making. And oftentimes the biggest thing that happens in the breach is not people not paying attention. It's everybody trying to do a good thing and trying to be the hero, and conflicts result from everyone wanting to advance something forward in the way they want it. So having an IRP, as Matt says, and having it orchestrated in the way that you do business and how you really do business is the key to keeping the chaos as manageable as you can.
Thanks, Amy. All right, so more lovely reporting laws and obligations that I'm gonna speed through because I think we are losing a lot of time. So guess what? Yacht's a public company. That means as of recently, there are now reporting obligations they have to the SEC. And that is one of the tightest reporting windows that there are outside of the GDPR. So it's 4 days. Yes, you can have different approaches for different size companies here. So smaller companies will have a bit more slack than the larger companies who, in theory, have more resources. Here, it all hinges on whether there was a material incident, and that is where you're going to spend a lot of your time. Is this material? And we have these conversations a lot in law school. Have fun, Ed. Because you know what's material to one company might not be material to another. It might be material based on a definition that from a law that applies to you. It's very much a consideration of all the circumstances of the incident and your organization. So you have to think about your risk tolerance and public statements about risk that you may have made. So be careful, and especially with reporting companies, this is when the time is really ticking against you because it's relatively new, but the SEC suffers no fools generally. So I guess we'll move along. But does anyone think you have to report to the SEC based on the facts we've gotten? Does anyone think we had a material breach? I'm sorry, material incident.
Yes.
Why?
I mean, I believe, I don't recall exactly, but I believe PII was taken.
Is
don't
it,
know
is it
yet.
material PII? Is it an email address? Is it?
It's got
Or
a
is it
first name,
social
and it's in
security
New
number?
Jersey, and it's got a driver's license, or anything that falls under that, then yeah.
Well, but that's the New Jersey law.
Wasn't it customer
Fair enough.
information? So like phone number?
Yeah.
Wasn't it customer
But how much
information?
damage can you do with a person's phone number?
Would it
I don't
influence a
remember what else.
reasonable investor to
There you go.
change their opinion on
That's
whether or
material.
not they wanted to purchase or sell the stock?
That's a good point.
That'd be like anything then, right?
Could be. Again, like we were saying before, I forget the scenario we were talking about, but you know, it might worry, it might concern a customer if it's a B2B situation, but the data itself, you might get your point of contact's email address and phone number and what they, you know, what office they work out of and what their title is. That's PII under some laws, but it's not really valuable or material information, right?
It's a merger information. or
Yeah,
something.
merger information, very much so. That'll move the needle on the valuation of the company, so.
What is a low probability of harm? Is that the term?
Depends.
You legal folks.
Anyway, totality of the circumstances. And then we also have an issue with Cercia because this is a public infrastructure or a critical infrastructure company. So any critical infrastructure organization, manufacturing, food, agriculture, you have 72 hours, which is also quite low, to report an event to a substantial event rather to the authorities, to CISA. And you, again, just like with most reporting, you have to have a good timeline set out, details of impact, what you've done to identify the attacker and or to resolve the issue, the event. And this doesn't actually, well, technically, I guess you don't have to do much with this yet because it's not effective until 2026. And the date is not even certain yet because we don't have a final rule. So let's pretend it's December 31st, 2026. Would you be reporting?
Yes. Yes.
That's what Go.
All right, next. Talking about vetting vendors. This is you.
So
Yeah.
again, you are getting the access to the slides. So I'm going to be brief, but when you think about these proactive privacy laws and the SEC laws and what have you, the company had an obligation in the first instance to kick the tires of its provider of voice. And what the regulators will be looking at as armchair quarterbacks is not only did the company have reasonable measures in place to prevent this type of an event, but did they appropriately kick the tires of the vendor that caused the event? And did they document that they had kicked the tires of that vendor, not only on day one, but, and we talked about this, Charlie and I were talking about this earlier, whether you're vetting every single vendor annually, whether there's certain vendors who maybe you don't have to vet every year because A, they've gotten a good grade on your last vetting, and B, they're not a critical vendor. But again, making sure that that's been documented, that yes, you have vetted these vendors, you know what their practices are, you've not only just looked at the SOC report, but you've also said, you know, are you ISO certified? Let's see if we can get in and talk to your CISO or your CIO or what have you, get more information as to what they're doing. Are they training their personnel? Do they make sure that their personnel don't have access credentials after they've been terminated? If they're on maternity leave, are their access credentials to my environment terminated while they're out on leave? These are the types of things that you want to dig into before the fact. And as a vendor, you don't want to just say yes to customer questionnaires. First of all, you may be in breach of contract if you gave misrepresentations. Second of all, if you just said yes to your customers or to your insurance carrier and said, yes, I do these wonderful things, and then it turns out you didn't, breach of contract, loss of insurance coverage.
That's the worst.
So think about what you have said upstream, downstream, and are your vendors vetting their vendors if they're using third parties to process sensitive company information? And again, we talked about negotiating insurance policies. You can negotiate your contracts. Remember, I mentioned that I'm negotiating this contract right now where the vendor is trying to limit their liability to 3 times or 75 grand. That's something that should be negotiated. Indemnification is something that should be negotiated. What constitutes a breach or an incident in that agreement should be negotiated. Take a look at the slides. I don't want to take more time about this, but the information is available.
One of the golden rules in privacy and even incident responses, do what you say and say what you do. That's why using ChatGPT to generate things is not a good idea. Stealing policies from competitors is not a good idea because one, someone always forgets to do Control F within your company and your competitor's name is still there. And two, they do things differently than you. It might be equivalent to what you do, but it's not the same. You should try to keep up with industry peers, but you should not say you're doing what they're doing if you are not. That's how you get in crosshairs of regulators.
I have to say,
And if I can give you the benefit too of everybody has usually a procurement department, some level of policy statement where they're attempting to sanction and attempting to audit with audit questionnaires. However, know the vendor. Oftentimes, security is being pitted against the business, and it doesn't matter how many times you've told this vendor and tried to sanction this vendor. They're too important to the business for them to be fired, to be appropriately sanctioned, to wage a lawsuit. If they're, for example, your main call center vendor, you might have to live with them for a very, very long time. So definitely listen to what the lawyers are saying on the panel, because at the time in which you can make an inflection point before the vendor is hired, you know, try to get as much information about that vendor and the importance of that vendor as possible, because unfortunately, you two are lying in the bed together once that vendor is breached. And we've even had circumstances where you have to continue using a vendor, but that vendor is in the process of selling you under the bus to your regulators. And it happens. And these disputes get very, very nasty when they occur.
but just one other quick thought on insurance. One of the things that I always put into my agreements where it's a critical vendor, where I am asking them to indemnify us and we are asking them to provide cyber insurance, crime coverage, what have you, is that they notify us if their policy limits are eroded by more than 1/3 in a policy period. Because it'd be really nice to know if you're counting on that pot of gold to stand behind the vendor, that it's still available for your claim versus their other customers' claims.
Someone else, if it's a big enough breach for the vendor that is only giving you 75 grand a year, and they only have, what, 2 million in cyber and nothing else. If they have a lot of customers and they have a big enough breach, that $2 million disappears quickly, and maybe that 75 grand actually looks like a bigger piece than what you would get otherwise.
How many people are using a TPRM or like a third party service to do risk management? Couple. How many people are rolling their own vendor questionnaire? Okay. I would strongly encourage you guys to look at some sort of standardized third party risk management platform so that all of your vendors get the same questions. Those platforms know what to ask and how to ask it, and they can standardize the responses. They can red flag, potentially problematic responses.
The SIG, right? It's like a standard.
SIG is good. The SIG Lite is faster,
Yeah,
but
that's right,
yeah. But right at the end of the day, you're still you have to kind of one-to-one those things, and it's those third-party platforms, and I forget the name of all of them now, just because I want to be agnostic, but look into those because they can help you standardize and really assess the risk of vendors. Which one do you use?
So we're rolling out UpGuard.
Okay. Nice.
I've used
All right.
Enterprise before, and that's very good.
Which one?
Enterprise.
Enterprise?
Yeah, they're healthcare specific, so.
Yeah.
And they're interesting because they maintain a database of, basically they have a portal.
Mhm.
You send the vendors the link, they go in, they fill out the questions, and then the vendor gets assigned a general rating on their classification. And then if another company goes and is like, oh, I want to sign up for this service, and I wonder what vendor X, what they are, that company doesn't reassess them. They go, I want to see vendor X's rating, and it's like, oh, we've rated vendor X. They're this.
Cool. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure there's a few that are, that's a cool idea. I think that's kind of used in some other industries too, but yeah, the whole idea use once and, cut down on the duplication of effort is a good.
Mhm.
All right.
Crowdsourcing, that's vendor security. That's great.
Amy, we're gonna wrap it up and leave it with you. Okay, you're gonna be the closer for this.
The closer. She's always the closer.
Yeah. Well, we didn't really get to talk about negotiations,
Wait,
but
hold on, Derek. Can you put her on so we can actually see the instead of her being the voice of God?
How do you know what I call her?
hallelujah.
There we go. All right, Amy. Everybody can see.
All right. Well, I'm going to talk really quick because literally Matt and I need to get onto a war room call for another incident. But when you have a ransomware and data is an issue, most of the ransoms now have a subsidiary or a primary data attack because many of you guys have EDRs, and maybe when you have a ransomware deployed, one system, maybe two systems get encrypted. It's a big nothing burger. The money is the data. So when you have a ransomware event and you see encryption files and you see a README file, and then you get that lovely notice that data is involved, Matt, what do you do?
Well, I call a negotiator. Is that what you're looking for?
That is exactly what I'm looking for. Hopefully the moment that you saw encrypted files in the README file, you've already called your negotiator. And just so you guys know, not all negotiators are created equal. Everybody and everybody's brother who has an incident response unit now has a negotiator. This is a defined, specified skill set. And there are some really good groups that have really crappy, excellent forensics, crappy negotiators. So your negotiator, you should know as a person and have worked with them as a person, as opposed to picking the firm that you've always loved for IR. Sorry for that, Matt.
Yeah, no, you're good. No, what she's saying is true, right? Threat actor negotiation is essentially bargaining with criminals for a living, right? And that takes a special kind of person. It takes a special kind of mindset. And as ransomware changes and evolves, right, we've gone from single extortion file encryption to double extortion with data exfiltration, with now we're into triple extortion, right? So as the tactics evolve, as the threat actors are learning and responding to how negotiators are handling these things, we have to then adapt our tactics. So the things that worked 6 months ago don't work today. And then furthermore, there are certain things that we need to do in order to make a competent decision to advise the client on whether they should pay. Like, hey, what files have you taken from the organization? Can you actually decrypt files? Can you prove how much data you've taken? Have we analyzed the proof of life or the proof of exfiltration? How do we get these files? How do we analyze them securely? Like, there's a whole bunch of things that go into this, negotiation. It's not let me fire up Tor and go hit that onion site and just start talking to people and saying, what's it gonna cost? So just strongly, happy to answer any and all questions you guys have about it. It's a fascinating world, but the reality is it is a very, nothing is without, we're playing chess, not checkers.
And if your negotiator doesn't immediately, the moment that they get the README file, go for proof of life, which usually constitutes an index listing, proof that the file can be opened, and proof of a decryptor, then you're not dealing with an experienced negotiator. Like that's like 101 level arithmetic for negotiators. We expect them to be better than just basic arithmetic, but it's 101 level. Why do attackers do this? Because the more they can show you that they can unscrew your situation, the more they think that you're going to pay. When you know data is an issue and you get the proof of life in the file listing, usually in these ransom attacks, it's going to be a massive trove of yuck. Attackers like unstructured data because it's messy and it's hard for you to determine. It's easier for them to convince you to pay them. And by the way, I will always say this as a lawyer, paying or not paying a ransom has nothing to do with your legal obligations for notice. Paying or not paying a ransom only involves the optics and the care with which you are negotiating and addressing an incident. You will always have, the moment that data gets accessed or exfiltrated, depending on the state law that you're dealing with, you've got a notification obligation. I'm seeing OFAC restrictions. That is now a multi-layered beast. In the event that your attacker is on the OFAC list, they cannot be paid. One layer of that, though, is there are negotiating groups that even if the attacker is not on the OFAC list, they will not pay them. One of them rhymes with bovware. And you have to know the temperament of the negotiator that you're working with and what they know about the group. Also, there are other Treasury Department regulations other than OFAC. It is for all of the countries that are impacted and their destination of payment. And also, as you're dealing with OFAC, know that the government is going to get noticed when you pay, because that is a part of the underlying registered money transmitter, which is what these negotiators usually are. And Digital Mint and others who perform this registered money transmitter service, they must notify OFAC of the transaction. I can go into a lot more about that, but we're super short on time. When you get that file listing and you go through the data, it's usually a treasure trove of stuff that requires e-discovery, and you have to get an expert. If you hear an expert that says we're going to be able to examine unstructured data in 2 to 3 days, that is a misnomer. It is always a multi-week process unless you have structured data or some database that gives you complementary notice materials so you can find some other way to notify. There's lots of creative things that we can do once you get that file listing, but no, you're not going to have instantaneous answers for your executives. It's going to be a process of briefing them, identifying to them what is material, and then working through your negotiator, who is usually their greatest value is biding you time, because you're most concerned about when your data is going to be released. And by the way, all of you are looking at threat intelligence. Your clients are too. And you're always worried about a subsidiary attack when that attacker gets pissed off. And I will actually leave the final hallelujah moment to Matt, because this is also his world and I trust him on so many incidents and think that he is a lovely jewel in the industry.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, the one thing I'll say, right, is the group of people in the world that are doing this professionally is shrinking, right? So look at CrowdStrike, they no longer do threat actor negotiation. I don't know this to be, I think Unit 42 is scaling that back, but some of the biggest companies out there are actually peeling back from doing this because one, it is changing very dramatically. It is risky to do this. And one of the things you know, beyond attribution for OFAC and regulatory requirements, knowing who you're dealing with from a how to negotiate with them, right? The different groups respond very different, right? Akira, super aggressive. Black Basta could give a shit, right? They'll reset the timer 5 times over before they care, right? It's just knowing who you're dealing with will tell you how to negotiate with them. What's your opening offer? What's, you know, all of these things kind of come from experience. And, you know, it's like, if you've ever seen that movie, The Mechanic with Jason Statham, one of my favorite quotes is, good judgment comes from experience. And a lot of that comes from bad judgment. So learning from other people's mistakes, learning from what doesn't work, and kind of just really knowing this industry, it's not something I would say go out alone.
Yeah, and I'm going to say the unlawyerly thing, even though I'm a lawyer, I've been a partner and practice group leader. Every ransomware negotiation is a barrel of shit under lots and lots and lots of pressure. You need to make sure that you have a negotiating and legal team that are combined, that have been through the barrel of shit time and time and time together. Because you don't want anyone learning on your dime, even if they're insurance compensated. Because the money and legal fees and negotiation, that is pittance to the money you're losing if you're encrypted, if your clients see your data released, and if they see publicly the mess you don't want them to see. And if they do, if that happens, because this is, again, a barrel of shit show, you want to make sure you're with a team that can appropriately tweak the message, manage the press, and know how to work it. Because the most important piece of all of this is experience, because there's always going to be permutations of things that throw you for a loop. And our biggest value is our ability to pivot.
And remember, insurance will not compensate you for the loss of reputation.
All right, on that somber note.
I hope there's drinks. I hope there's drinks.
This, you didn't hate insurance already.
Yeah.
Let's give a hand to our panelists. This was months in progress. We met for a few months putting this together. So thank you for doing this, and hope everybody learned a lot. And you're welcome to stay a little bit to mingle, but that's the end of our event today. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you, guys. So sorry I couldn't travel. Nice to see everyone virtually.
If you need CPEs, look at Marie. She has a QR code. And Amy, you have one more thing to say?
Here.
Oh, no, wait, you got something on this. Okay.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you. Nice seeing everyone. All right, bye, guys.
Negotiating with your kids.